Picture a city stacked like a fever dream, not sprawling outward the way a healthy city does, spreading its streets and gardens across the land. No, this city builds upward. 13, 14, 15 stories of stone and timber and desperation, all leaning together over narrow alleyways so dark that noon looks like dusk and dusk looks like nothing at all. Now fill it with 60,000 people. Pour them into those buildings, 8 families to a floor, 3 people to a bed, children on the stairs. Add 30,000 chimneys, all burning coal, all day, every day, the smoke rolling out across the ridge until the whole city disappears into its own exhalation. Add the smell of that, the coal smoke and the animal dung and the human waste that gets tipped from upper windows every evening, falling 6, 8, 10 stories onto whoever is unlucky enough to be walking below. That is Edinburgh in 1753. Not the Edinburgh of postcards and whisky advertisements and tartan shortbread tins. Not the graceful Georgian city that tourists walk through today, admiring the new town architecture and the castle on its volcanic rock. That Edinburgh doesn't exist yet, won't exist for another 20 years. This Edinburgh is medieval. This Edinburgh is a ridge of ancient stone buildings crammed so close together they block out the sky. The streets run with water that is not water. The air tastes of something you would rather not identify. The castle sits at one end of the Royal Mile like a grey fist, and from the castle the road runs east for a mile downhill, past taverns and tenements and printing houses and tanners and fishwives and beggars, past the closes that cut between the buildings like narrow wounds, all the way down to the Palace of Holyrood House at the bottom, where a different world exists for people who are not you. This is Old Reekie, Old Smoky, the name they give this place because the smoke hangs over it like a permanent weather system, like the city is always burning, always on the edge of some catastrophe it has learned to live with. I make these history stories, and I want to be honest with you. I had no idea when I started researching this one what it actually meant to be sick in 1750s Edinburgh. I thought I did. I thought I knew the basics. No antibiotics, obviously. Bleed the patient, maybe. A few herbs. Pray. I was wrong. The reality is stranger than that, more desperate than that, and in some ways more human than I expected. Because what you learn when you go deep into the records from this time in this city is that sick people were not waiting around for medicine to save them. They were making decisions every single day, with whatever they had, in whatever room they were trapped in, with whatever knowledge had been passed down to them from their own mothers and grandmothers, and the women who lived 2 floors up, and the man on the corner, who claimed to know something about fevers. They were improvising, desperately, sometimes brilliantly, often tragically. So get comfortable. Here we go. Your eyes open before you're ready for them to. Not because the bells, though the bells will come. Not because the light has changed, because there is no light yet, not even close. There is just darkness and the sound that pulled you out of sleep, and it takes you half a breath to understand what you're hearing. Coughing. Not the ordinary cough of someone clearing their throat in the morning, not the shallow cough of cold air on the back of the throat. This is a cough that goes deep, deeper than a cough should go, deeper than the chest and into something below the chest, something that sounds wrong in a way you can't name but your body understands immediately. You're out of the bed before you've decided to move. The floor of the tenement room is cold stone under your bare feet, and the cold moves up through your soles and your ankles and into your legs, and you don't care about any of that because the coughing is coming from the other side of the room and you're moving toward it. You live in 3 rooms on the 4th floor of a tenement on the north side of the Lawnmarket, which is the upper part of the Royal Mile, which is the spine of Edinburgh, which is the ridge of volcanic rock that runs from the castle to the palace, and has roughly 60,000 people living along its length, and its tributary closes and winds and courts. Your family's portion of this city is the 3 rooms, the 4th floor, the rent that eats a third of what your mother earns taking in laundry. Your mother. The coughing is coming from your mother's corner of the room. She shares the room with you and your brother Tam, who is 12 and currently sleeping through this with the impervious unconsciousness of a child who has not yet learned what 3 in the morning sounds like when something is wrong. You have a straw pallet and she has a straw pallet and Tam has a straw pallet, and in winter you push them together because the cold comes through the stone walls no matter what you do, seeping in from the outside air, from the earth itself, from the stone that has been absorbing this city's chill for 300 years. You crouch beside her pallet and put your hand on her forehead and feel what you already knew you were going to feel. Heat. Real heat. Not the warmth of someone sleeping, not the flush of a cold room abandoned for a moment. This is the heat of something wrong in the blood, something working too hard, something burning in a direction a body is not supposed to burn. You say her name, Margaret. Ma'am. She opens her eyes and in the darkness you can see the glitter of them, too bright, the brightness of fever. It's fine, she says. Her voice sounds scraped. It's nothing. Go back to sleep. It is not fine. It is not nothing. You know this because you have felt this heat before. You felt it on your father's forehead 2 years ago, and then again 3 days later, and then again a week after that, each time a little worse than the time before, each time the brightness in his eyes a little more distant, until one morning the brightness was gone, and there was just the cooling of a face that had been too hot for too long. You know what a fever can become. The cough comes again, and she turns her face into the pallet to muffle it, and you hear the thickness in it, the wet sound at the bottom of it, and your stomach goes cold in a way that has nothing to do with the temperature of the room. How long? You ask. How long have you been coughing? She waves a hand, the gesture of someone who does not want to worry you. A few days, a week, maybe. It's just the cold in the air. You know how September gets. A week. She's been coughing for a week, and she has not told you. You sit back on your heels and look at her in the darkness and think about what you have, and what you don't have, and what you need to do next. This is what illness looks like for people like you in Edinburgh in 1753. Not a clean hospital bed. Not a physician standing at the bedside with his black bag. Not a prescription carefully written out on paper and filled at a modern pharmacy with precise dosages and known mechanisms and centuries of clinical trial behind it. It looks like this. A dark room, a stone floor, a woman on a straw pallet telling you she's fine when you can feel the fever on her skin from 6 inches away. And you, crouched beside her, trying to remember everything your grandmother ever told you about fevers. Your grandmother was a practical woman. She came from the small burg of Dumfries, a day's journey to the south, and she knew things about illness the way she knew things about curing hides and preserving meat, which is to say she had learned them from necessity, not from any book or university or formal training. She knew which herbs to gather in summer and dry for winter. She knew what a fever looked like when it was breaking and what it looked like when it was going the other way. She knew how to bring a child through croup and how to sit with someone through the sweating sickness and what a death rattle sounded like, though she never used those words for it. She taught your mother, and your mother taught you, and here is what you know. A fever is the body fighting something. The heat is not the illness, it is the body's response to the illness. This is not how most physicians of 1753 would put it. Most physicians of 1753 would tell you that a fever is an imbalance of the humours, an excess of blood or yellow bile or black bile or phlegm, and that the treatment is to correct the imbalance by bleeding or purging or sweating or some combination of the three. This is what educated men believe, and they have believed it for 2,000 years, since before the time of Galen, since before Rome, since the Greeks first sat down and tried to explain why bodies fail. Your grandmother did not know about humours. She did not have access to medical theory. What she had was 50 years of watching people get sick and watching them recover or not recover. And from that watching, she had drawn conclusions that were sometimes wrong and sometimes right, and occasionally, by accident or intuition, or some combination of both, surprisingly close to what people in the following century would start to understand about how the body actually works. She believed in warmth and broth and sweating, but not too much sweating. She believed in keeping liquids going in, even when the sick person fought it, especially when the sick person fought it. She believed in keeping the room as clean as you could manage, because filth, she said, is where sickness breeds. And she did not know the mechanism, but she was not entirely wrong. She did not believe in bleeding. She had seen too many people bled and come out worse for it. She kept this belief to herself, mostly, because bleeding was official medicine, blessed by physicians and surgeons and the whole apparatus of educated authority. And a woman from Dumfries was not in a position to argue with that authority publicly. But privately, quietly, she watched the bled patients and the unbled patients, and drew her own conclusions. This is the knowledge you're working from at 3 a.m. in a dark room in Edinburgh, with your mother's fever hot under your hand. You do not have much. Let me tell you what you actually have, because this matters. This is the reality of medicine for ordinary people in 1750s Edinburgh, and it is not glamorous, and it is not particularly effective, and it is all you've got. In the corner of the room where you keep your stores, on a small shelf your father built before he died, there is a clay pot with a wooden lid. Inside the pot are dried herbs wrapped in linen. Chamomile, which your grandmother swore by for calming the stomach and quieting fevers. Elderflower, the same. A twist of dried ginger root, hard as wood now for settling the belly and warming the blood when someone is chilled. A small packet of something you bought from a woman in the market 2 months ago, and are not entirely certain you can identify, but which the woman swore was good for coughs, a claim you're now very much hoping is accurate. There is also, tucked behind the pot, a small bottle, green glass, thick-walled, with a stopper of wax. Inside is something your mother brought back from the apothecary shop on the high street after your father died. Something she paid more for than she should have. Something she has never fully explained to you. You know it contains opium. You know it is to be used only in extremity. You know that a few drops in water can make pain bearable or sleep possible. And you know that too many drops will do other things that you do not want to think about right now. You leave the green bottle where it is. There is water in the bucket by the hearth, from yesterday's trip to the well at the bottom of the close. It is probably not entirely clean. The well serves the whole close, which means it serves maybe 300 people, and 300 people are generating waste continuously in a city where the only sanitation system is gravity and rain. But it is what you have. You cannot boil it tonight because you have no fire lit. and you have no fire because fuel cost money, and money is not something that appears easily in this room, you go back to your mother. You press the inside of your wrist against her forehead, the way she always did it when you were small, the way that reads temperature more accurately than the palm for reasons you could not explain but know to be true from experience. She is hot. She is very hot. I'm going to make you a drink, you say. She starts to protest. You ignore it. You work in the dark because you're not going to waste a tallow candle at 3 in the morning when you can feel your way well enough. You know where the pot hangs over the cold hearth. You know where the fire steel and tinder are kept. You know the shape of this room the way you know the shape of your own hands. Getting a fire lit in a Scottish tenement at 3 in the morning is not a quick process. The tinder is slightly damp. Your hands are cold and clumsy. The steel sparks, but the tinder takes 3 attempts before it catches, and by the time you have coaxed it into something that will sustain a flame and built the kindling carefully over it the way your father showed you, balancing each piece to allow air through, by the time you have the fire going, your knees are aching from crouching on the stone floor, and your fingers are scraped from the fire steel, and the room is very slightly warmer. You put water in the pot and hang it over the fire. While it heats, you open the clay pot on the shelf and take out the chamomile and the elderflower and the thing you bought in the market, and you hold the market thing up to the firelight and look at it. Dried leaves, grey-green, slightly dusty. Could be anything. Could be what the woman said it was. You put it in anyway, because what are you going to do? Leave it out. The water takes a long time to heat. Not to boil, just to heat. You're not trying to make tea exactly. You're making what your grandmother called a posset, which is hot liquid with things in it that are supposed to help, and the recipe for it changes depending on who is making it, and what they have and what they think the sick person needs. Some possets have ale in them, some have wine, some have egg. Yours has chamomile and elderflower, and the unidentified market herb and hot water, and that is the best you can do. You pour it into a cup that your family has had for as long as you can remember, a wide earthenware cup with a crack down one side that has never leaked. You carry it to your mother. She is awake. She has been awake the whole time, watching you move around the room in the firelight, and something in her face as you bring her the cup makes your chest hurt. It is the face of a woman trying not to let you see how bad she feels. She drinks, slowly. You make her drink all of it. Tam sleeps through this with the deep unconsciousness of 12-year-old exhaustion. There is something both comforting and terrible about the sound of his breathing, steady and oblivious, while you and your mother sit in the firelight and say nothing. You should sleep, she says, when the cup is empty. So should you. I'll sleep better than you will. This is probably true. The fever will take her back under. But her idea of sleep and what sleep is supposed to look like are not the same thing right now, and you both know it. I'm going to sit here, you say, just for a while. She doesn't argue. That, more than anything, tells you something about how she actually feels. You sit by the fire and listen to the sounds of the city outside the window. Edinburgh at 3 in the morning is not quiet. There is no version of Edinburgh at any hour that is entirely quiet. The taverns run until there is nobody left who can pay, which is sometimes midnight and sometimes 4 in the morning and sometimes somewhere in between. The watchmen walk their routes, calling the hours, their voices carrying up the closes and echoing off the tenement walls. Dogs. The occasional cart, though most cart traffic is banned from the city after dark because the streets are too narrow for carts and pedestrians to coexist during daylight without catastrophe. So night is when the dray horses come through. pulling loads by torchlight, the hooves loud on the stone. And underneath all of it, underneath the human noise, there is something else. The sound of a city of 60,000 people breathing, sleeping mostly, turning over, snoring, coughing, crying in the dark. All those lives stacked on top of each other in these impossible tall buildings, separated from each other by stone and wooden floors, close enough to hear each other's arguments through the walls, close enough to smell each other's cooking and each other's waste and each other's sickness. This is the other thing about Edinburgh's tenements that you know so well you barely notice it anymore. The density, not just of people but of everything. Disease moves through a building like this the way water moves through a sponge. One family gets the cough, and within a week the family above and the family below and the family across the landing are all coughing too, all sleeping badly and drinking possets and wondering whether to go to the apothecary or whether they can wait it out. You've been in Edinburgh for 3 years. You came up from Dumfries with your family when your father got work in one of the printing houses on the high street, and you have been learning the city ever since, learning its rhythms and its dangers and its geography, its closes and courts and winds, the back ways and the fast ways and the ways to avoid at night. You know, for instance, that the close beneath your building is not a place to walk after dark without a companion or a light, because there are men who operate there after the taverns close who have various ways of separating you from whatever you're carrying. You know that the water from the Lady Well is slightly less foul than the water from the well in Baxter's Close, because the Lady Well has fewer privies within contaminating distance. You know that on Saturday mornings the fish market fills the lower Lawnmarket with a smell that goes right through your head and out the other side, and that this is actually a good time to buy, because the prices drop at midday when the fishwives need to move the last of their stock before it goes completely off. You know which neighbours to trust and which ones to avoid. You know that the woman on the floor above, Janet Creighton, has a knowledge of herbs that exceeds your grandmother's, acquired over decades of necessity, and that she will share this knowledge if approached correctly, which means not as if you're asking a favour, but as if you're consulting an authority. You know that the man on the floor below, a weaver named Andrew Forsyth, is religious in a way that sometimes expresses itself as judgment, and that he is more likely to tell you to pray than to offer practical assistance, though he is not unkind. You know these things the way you know the shape of the room, by living here, day after day, year after year, until the city is part of you. The fire is burning down. You add another piece of coal, small, rationing it, thinking about how far into the week you are, and how much is left in the coal box and how long it needs to last. You're a week out from your mother's next laundry payment, and between now and then you have what you have. Your mother is sleeping again. Her breathing is not right, too fast, too shallow, with a catch in it that makes you listen too carefully whenever it comes. But she is sleeping. The fever will keep her sleeping. That is the one mercy of it. You think about what you can actually do. This is the practical question that faces everyone in your position, in your time and your city, when someone in the family is sick. Not the philosophical question of why, or the medical question of what is wrong in any precise sense. The practical question of what you can do with what you have in the time you have it. You have herbs and hot water. You have the knowledge your grandmother gave you, imperfect and incomplete and sometimes contradictory. You have the woman upstairs, Janet Creighton, who knows more than you do. You have the apothecary on the high street, Mr. Affleck, who knows more than Janet Creighton, but who costs money you do not have in the quantity he expects. You have the Royal College of Surgeons, which exists in Edinburgh, and is actually important and actually contains people who know things, but who will not come to a tenement on the Lawnmarket for someone like you unless you can pay for a surgeon's time, which you cannot, and you have the physicians of the university, the men of the Edinburgh Medical School, which opened in 1726, and is already becoming one of the most important medical schools in the world, and which is approximately half a mile from where you're sitting. Close enough to see the windows of Surgeon Square from the end of your close on a clear day, and as distant from your life as the moon. The distance is not geographical. The distance is money. A physician charges half a guinea for a visit. Half a guinea is 3 weeks of your mother's laundry earnings. Half a guinea might as well be half a fortune, for the practical difference it makes to your calculations at 3 in the morning. This is the world of medicine in Edinburgh in 1753. There is brilliant, emerging, genuinely important medical thinking happening in this city, happening a few streets away, happening in lecture halls and dissection theatres, and the minds of men who will shape the next century of medicine. And none of it reaches you here in this room with your mother's fever and your handful of dried herbs and your green bottle of laudanum that you're trying very hard not to think about. You make your decision. In the morning, you will go to Janet Crichton upstairs. She will know more than you do about what to do next. If the fever hasn't broken by afternoon, you will go to Mr. Affleck's apothecary shop on the high street and spend money you don't have on something that might help. And if neither of those works, you will send Tam for Margaret Irvine, the howdie wife who lives in the court off the Cannon Gate, who delivers babies and sits with the sick and knows things about fevers and coughs that she has never written down anywhere and never will, but which have kept more people in this city alive than any physician's theory. That is your plan. You lean your back against the wall by the fire and put your knees to your chest and sit with your mother's breathing and the sounds of the city and the small orange light of the dying fire, and you wait for morning. Morning in Edinburgh announces itself with bells. Not one bell, not two. Dozens of church bells, all slightly out of sync with each other, some big and deep and slow, some small and fast and insistent, cascading across the ridge of the city and down into the closes and up off the tenement walls until the whole ridge is ringing. The biggest and closest is St. Giles. You can hear it from anywhere on the Lawnmarket. It has been ringing the hours and the quarter hours and the beginning of services since before your grandmother's grandmother was born. It rings now for 6 in the morning, 6 measured strokes, each one hanging in the cold air above the city before the next one comes. Tam wakes up at the 4th stroke the way children do, abruptly and completely, from unconsciousness to full wakefulness in the time it takes to open his eyes. He looks at you across the room. You put your finger to your lips. Your mother is still sleeping. He crosses the room quietly. He has learned to be quiet in the mornings, has learned it the way children learn things in crowded tenements, by watching and absorbing. He crouches beside you. You can see him looking at your mother, at the position of her, the tightness of the face, the too fast breathing. How long? He asks very quietly. She says a week. I think she's minimizing. He nods. He's 12, but he's seen a man die of fever. He knows what minimizing means. I'm going upstairs to talk to Mistress Crichton, you say. You stay here. If she wakes up, give her water. There's some left in the bucket. If the cough gets bad, come and get me. The cough's been bad before, he says. I know. Come and get me anyway. Mistress Janet Crichton lives on the 5th floor of the same building, directly above you, in 2 rooms that somehow feel more organised than your 3. She's 62 years old, a widow of 20 years, small and sharp-eyed, and wearing always a linen cap that she has had for so long it has its own geological history. Laundered so many times the white has gone slightly yellow at the edges. She smells of lavender and something else, something herbal and green, and underneath it all slightly medicinal, the smell of a person who has been working with plants for decades. She opens her door before you finish knocking on it. She was already up. She is always already up. You explain what is happening. She listens without interrupting, which you appreciate. She asks 2 questions. How long has the cough been wet? By which she means how long has it had that sound at the bottom of it? That sound like there is something in the lungs that should not be there. And has your mother been cold at all? The kind of cold that goes right through you, even when you're warm. You say a week for the wet cough, and yes to the cold. Mistress Crichton's face does something careful. It does not do anything alarming, but it does something careful, the kind of careful that tells you she has filed away information and is deciding what to say and what not to say. She goes to her own shelf, larger than yours, more crowded, more organised, jars and packets and bundles of dried things whose smell hits you as she opens the cupboard door. A wave of green and brown and dusty and strange, and begins selecting things with the brisk certainty of someone who has done this hundreds of times. Lungwort, she says, holding up a dried plant that looks like nothing much. Grey-brown leaves with pale spots. Pleurisy root, mullein, white horehound for the cough, and this. She holds up a small jar containing something dark and slightly oily looking. Goose grease, for the chest. Rub it on before she sleeps. Cover it with a cloth. Keep her warm. She measures and wraps and talks while she works, because Mistress Crichton believes that people should know what they're giving to the sick people in their care, should understand what each thing is supposed to do and why, which is an attitude so different from the way the physicians work, who believe that patients should be told as little as possible, that too much information confuses the ignorant, that it constitutes a kind of philosophy in itself. The lungwort, she says, draws the fluid, or that's what we say, and it seems to help, though I couldn't tell you why. The pleurisy root brings on sweating, which is what a fever needs. Not too much sweating. You'll wear her out, but the body needs to push whatever this is out through the skin. The horehound coats the throat and quiets the cough enough to let her sleep, and sleep is what heals her. She pauses, looks at you directly. How long since she ate? Yesterday. Maybe the day before, she wasn't saying. Mistress Crichton makes a short sound that is not quite a word. Broth. Whatever you can get. Beef if you can afford it, which I suspect you can't right now. Chicken if you can find a sauce that isn't ruinous. If neither of those is possible, barley water with onion. It sounds like nothing, but it is not nothing. The body needs something to fight with. You cannot fight a fire with empty hands. You think about the state of your pantry. There is barley, there is an onion. You almost certainly cannot afford chicken right now. Barley and onion, you say. Barley and onion, she confirms. Plenty of it. Keep it thin, not thick. She needs to drink it more than eat it. And keep the water coming. Fever takes water out of the body. You have to put it back in. You thank her. She waves it off with the impatience of someone who doesn't need to be thanked for doing what is obvious to her. Come back this afternoon and tell me how she is, she says. And if she gets worse, she pauses. If she gets worse, we'll talk about what else we can do. What that means, hanging in the air between you, is that if the herbal remedies and the broth and the warmth do not begin to turn the fever by afternoon, you're going to have to make harder decisions. About the apothecary, about money you don't have, about how far the green bottle in the corner represents a last resort and how far it represents something you're not ready to call by its proper name. You take the herbs and the goose grease and go back downstairs. Tam is sitting beside your mother with a cup of water, waiting. He has done this exactly right. He has not woken her, has not fussed, has simply sat there in case she needed the water, present and quiet and useful in the way that makes you feel a complicated rush of something that might be love and might be fear, because he is 12 and he should not have to know how to do this. Your mother is awake when you come in, barely but awake. You mix the first herbs in hot water, watching the water turn the colour of weak tea. The lungwort releases something into the water that makes it slightly cloudy. The horehound has a bitter smell that makes Tam wrinkle his nose. The pleurisy root smells medicinal, almost sharp, and you find yourself wondering for a moment what exactly is in it. What mechanism makes it do what Mistress Crichton says it does, whether it's the plant itself or the hot water, or simply the heat that makes the body begin to sweat. These are not questions you can answer. You don't have the vocabulary for them. You don't have the education, but the questions are there, somewhere under the practical surface of what you're doing, the curiosity that has no outlet in your life, the wondering about how things actually work that you have carried since childhood and have never had the opportunity to satisfy. Your mother drinks the herbal posset more willingly than you expected. This is sometimes how fever works, this docility, this lessening of the fight. You're not sure if it's a good sign or a bad one. You rub the goose grease onto her chest. It is cold from the jar, and she makes a small sound at the contact. It smells of rendered fat and something slightly rancid, the smell of an animal product stored through a summer. You wrap a piece of linen around her chest to hold the warmth in, the way Mistress Crichton told you, and pull the blanket up and tuck it in around her. Stay warm, you say. She says something that might be a scent, or might be something else, or might be nothing, and her eyes close again. You stand in the middle of the room for a moment. Tam is looking at you. I need to go out, you say. I need to get barley and an onion, and if there's anything else I can find. You think about the coins in the small cup on the shelf. I won't be long. I'll be here, he says. This is how the morning works. For you, in Edinburgh in 1753, when your family is sick and you are the one who has to solve it. You go out into the close. The close is a narrow covered passage that runs between two buildings and drops steeply downhill from the Lawnmarket to the closes and courts below. It is barely wide enough for two people to pass, and the buildings on either side are so tall that even at 9 in the morning, with the sun up and the city active, the close is in deep shadow. The stone is always damp in here. The smell is always bad. Something organic lives in the cracks between the stones, and over the years that something has built up into a layer of dark matter along the walls at knee height, and you stopped thinking about what exactly it is long ago, because there's no profit in it. The city outside the close is already in full voice. You emerge onto the Lawnmarket and are immediately in the crowd. This is the thing about Edinburgh that never quite stops being astonishing, no matter how long you've lived here. The sheer density of human activity. The street is wide by Edinburgh standards, wide enough for a cart to pass and pedestrians on both sides, though in practice it is rarely this orderly. This morning it is fishwives with their baskets, moving quickly, calling their wares in the sharp cadences of the fish market. It is apprentice boys running errands, darting between the slower moving adults like fish in a current. It is men in decent coats, tradespeople and merchants, walking with the slightly faster pace of people who have somewhere specific to be and a clear idea of their own importance. The air smells of coal smoke and something sharply animal that is probably the horse passing 30 feet ahead of you, and something underneath both of those that is the city's permanent baseline smell. The smell it generates simply by existing. 60,000 bodies and their outputs in a space smaller than you can quite believe when you think about it. You're not thinking about it. You're thinking about barley and an onion, and whether the woman who usually sells dried herbs at the bottom of the market today has anything useful for chest complaints, and whether you should save the last of the coins or spend them on the chance that what she has might actually help. The market is at its morning peak. Tuesday market, the weekly market that fills the lower end of the Lawnmarket with stalls and sellers and people buying what they need for the week. There is a logic to the market that you've learned, a geography of it. The food sellers cluster near the well because water is needed for most food preparation, and proximity to water is an advantage. The fabric sellers take the covered section near the old toll booth because the weather is harder on cloth than it is on people. The herb women and the sellers of medicines and simples take a section of their own near the East End, partly because they prefer each other's company, and partly because there is a tacit agreement, never discussed, that the sellers of remedies should be somewhat separate from the sellers of food, as if the proximity might be confusing. The herb woman today is not the one you're hoping for. The one you're hoping for is a woman named Bessie Cunningham, who grew up in the borders and knows the hill plants, and who you have bought from before with good results. The woman here today is younger, with a table of wares that looks slightly too neat, slightly too arranged, the goods of someone who has organised them for sale, rather than out of long familiarity with their properties. You look at her stock anyway. There is dried elder, which you already have. There is something labelled cough remedy in a hand that suggests the label was written by someone else, and which smells when you lean close of something sharp and slightly sweet that you cannot identify and find mildly alarming. There is valerian, which is for sleep and not what you need. There is a small bundle of something that might be thyme. Thyme. Your grandmother used thyme for chest complaints. She made a tea of it that she gave to anyone with a cough that was going deep. You pick it up. Good for the chest, the woman says, noting your attention. I know, you say. You buy the thyme for a penny. You buy barley from a grain seller in the middle of the market. Barley is cheap. Barley is the poor person's staple. Barley is what gets you through the week when everything else runs short. You look for onions and find them at the bottom of the market, 3 for a halfpenny, and you buy 3. Then you stand in the market for a moment and think about whether you can do more. The coins are almost gone. You've enough left for one more thing, one more purchase, something that might make a material difference. The question is what? The apothecary. Mr. David Affleck's shop is on the upper part of the High Street between the Lawnmarket and St. Giles's Cathedral. It has been there for 20 years. It smells of things you cannot identify, which is partly because Mr. Affleck has access to substances from across the known world that do not have local equivalents in smell, and partly because some of what he stocks does not smell like anything you want to breathe too deeply. The door stands open despite the September chill, because Mr. Affleck believes that fresh air is good for the character of his shop, a philosophical position you suspect has more to do with the smells inside than with any genuine conviction. You have been in Mr. Affleck's shop 3 times. The first time was with your mother, buying something for Tam's croup when he was 8, and they had just arrived in Edinburgh. The second time was after your father died, when your mother bought the laudanum. The third time was last spring when you yourself had a fever that lasted 4 days, and you spent money you did not have on something that probably did nothing, but that you were too sick and too frightened not to try. You know what an apothecary shop is in Edinburgh in 1753. It is not a pharmacy in any modern sense. It is something between a chemist and a physician's assistant, and a seller of substances that may or may not do what they claim. Mr. Affleck has trained, formally, through apprenticeship and examination, and he knows his materia medica, his pharmacy, his Latin names, his weights and measures, and he is better at what he does than most of what you can access for free. He also charges for it significantly in a way that reflects his training and his supplies and his overhead and the fact that most of what he stocks has to come from somewhere far away, at considerable cost. He is behind the counter when you come in. He is always behind the counter. He is a man of perhaps 50, not tall, with a face that in different circumstances might be kind, but which has been organised by years of dealing with difficult customers into something more cautious and evaluating. He wears his apothecary's apron, which is clean this morning, and he is measuring something into a small paper packet with the care of someone who takes his weight seriously. He looks up when you come in. His expression does the thing that it always does, a quick reading of you, of your clothes, of what your presence in his shop indicates about your likely ability to pay, and the result of this reading settles his face into a particular arrangement that is professional courtesy applied over the substratum of someone who has learned to calibrate his warmth to the customer's probable value. "Good morning," he says. "Good morning, Mr. Affleck. I need something for a chest fever. Cough. I think there's something in the lungs." He puts down his weights. His attention, you notice, is sharper now. A chest cough with fever is not nothing. He knows that as well as you do. "How long has the fever been present?" "At least a week. Possibly longer." "The cough. Is there colour? Is she bringing anything up?" The question is more personal than you expected. More clinical, more direct. You answer it directly. "Some yellow, sometimes a little darker." He's quiet for a moment. "Age?" 41. He nods. There is something in the nod that you do not want to read into. "I have a compound for chest fever," he says. "Elecampane root, colt's foot, horehound, with a small portion of ipecacuanha." He pauses. The ipecacuanha causes expectoration, helps bring up what's in the lungs. You nod. You know what expectoration means. You know what he's telling you without saying it. The compound will make her cough harder, bring up more, and what comes up is what is killing her, or what the fever is fighting, and getting it out is the goal. "How much?" you ask. He tells you. You have exactly half that amount in your pocket. There is a silence. It is the silence of arithmetic, of the calculation that is happening on both sides of the counter, that happens in Edinburgh every day in shops like this. The calculation of need against resource, of what can be afforded against what is necessary, of what happens if you say no and walk out and go home with nothing, and your mother's fever breaks or doesn't break with only thyme and chamomile and goose grease between her and whatever's coming next. "I have half," you say. He looks at you. He looks at his compound. He looks at you again. Mr. David Affleck is not a charitable man in any formal sense. He is a businessman, running a business with expenses and suppliers and a family of his own to sustain. He does not discount his medicines as a rule, because discounting medicines is not a sustainable practice, and because he has learned from hard experience that the appearance of flexibility leads to everyone asking for flexibility and the result is chaos. But he is also, underneath the careful professional courtesy, a man who got into this trade because he believed that he could help people who were sick. This belief has been substantially modified by 20 years of practice, but it has not been entirely eliminated. "I can give you half the compound," he says, "at half the price." This is a compromise. It is not exactly generosity, and it is not exactly business calculation. It is something in between, the kind of transaction that happens in Edinburgh's apothecary shops more often than the accounts record, the unofficial discount, the slightly shorter measure at the full price, the extra ingredient slipped into the packet by a hand that moves quickly. You take it. You thank him. You mean it. Outside the shop, you stand on the high street with the packet in your hand and look at what you have spent and what you have left. What you have left will buy nothing more of any use. This is the end of the coins until your mother is well enough to work again, and until then you are managing on what is in the room and what Mistress Crichton can provide, and what Tam can earn running errands, which is not nothing but is not much. You turn and walk back along the high street toward home. This is what caring for the sick costs in Edinburgh in 1753. Not just money, though money is most of it. It costs the time and the energy of whoever is doing the caring, and in families like yours, where the people who earn the money and the people who keep the household running are not separate categories, where they are the same person. Caring for one person means that person is not earning, which means the resources available for caring are depleting at exactly the moment they are most needed. This is the spiral. You learn to recognize it. In Edinburgh in the 1750s, the spiral that starts with illness and curves, if you're unlucky, toward destitution. Someone gets sick. The person who cares for them stops working or works less. The money coming in decreases at exactly the moment the money going out, on medicine, on fuel for the fire, on food the sick person can actually eat, increases. The margin narrows, the margin disappears, and then you are making different kinds of decisions. Decisions about what to do without, about who can help, about how long you can sustain this before the spiral takes you somewhere you cannot come back from. You know families this has happened to. Families in your building, in your clothes, in the courts around you. You know the particular quality of shame that attaches itself to that kind of need, the way people preempt help they've been given by insisting they don't need it and wouldn't normally ask. You are not there yet. You are nowhere near there. But you feel the edge of it, the awareness of where the edge is, the knowledge that it exists and that you are closer to it than people walking up the high street in good coats are close to it. And this awareness is one of the permanent textures of your life in this city, as ordinary and as present as the smell or the bells or the cold stone under your feet. You walk home. The stair back up to the 4th floor smells of everything the building contains. Cooking, coal smoke, something sour from the level where the weaver lives, the faint green smell from Mistress Crichton's floor above, where her herbs permeate the air with something almost pleasant. Your lungs know this smell. Your body recognizes it the way it recognizes the particular quality of light through your window in the afternoon. The way it knows without thinking which stair creaks and which is solid. Tam is at the table when you come in, doing nothing, which is Tam's version of watching very carefully without making it obvious. The pot you left over the low fire is doing something quiet with the barley and the onion. Your mother is lying in the same position as when you left, but she has turned her face toward the room, which you take as a possibly good sign. You give her the compound from Mr. Affleck first, because you are more confident in it than in the herbs, dissolved in a small measure of hot water. It smells sharp and medicinal, and not entirely pleasant, and she grimaces at the taste. What is it? Something from Mr. Affleck for the lungs. She looks at you, and you look at her, and the look contains everything that does not need to be said, which is that you spent money you don't have on this, and she knows it, and she is grateful and guilty in equal measure, and you're not going to discuss it now, or possibly ever. Drink it all, you say. She drinks it all. The coughing comes about 20 minutes later, harder than before, the ipecacuanha doing what it was made to do, forcing the body to expel what is in the lungs, and what comes up is the colour of old cream, thick, with a slightly greenish cast at the edges that makes you very carefully not change your expression. You hold a cloth for her and you rub her back and you say nothing. Just keep your hand moving in slow circles, and eventually the coughing subsides and she lies back exhausted and sweating. Sweating is good. Sweating is the body pushing the fever out through the skin. This is what Mistress Crichton said. You believe it. You make the barley water with the onion, cooking it down until the barley is soft and the liquid is thick and slightly sweet. And you add the thyme you bought in the market, letting it steep into the broth until the smell of it fills the room. It smells, actually, quite good. The thyme is sharp and bright, and the barley is warm and earthy, and for a moment you stand over the pot and feel something so close to ordinary life. Cooking, the smell of food, the familiar work of the pot and the spoon, that it is almost disorienting. You bring her a cup of the broth. She takes it without protest this time, which tells you something. Because your mother protests everything on principle, especially things that are good for her. Tam eats his breakfast at the table, bread and the thin ale you keep for morning, because the water from the well is not safe to drink unboiled, and ale is cheaper than fuel for boiling, and watches the room. He's doing that thing he does, that watchful stillness, waiting to be useful. It is one of his best qualities, and it is, you are aware, a quality he has developed out of necessity, out of growing up in a family where things go wrong, and the response to things going wrong is to be ready. The morning passes slowly. You clean the room. This is something that takes on particular significance when there is illness in the family. Mistress Crichton has told you, and your grandmother told you before her, that a clean room helps the sick. That filth is where illness breeds and spreads. You do not know the mechanism, and neither did your grandmother, and Mistress Crichton does not know it either, though she has her theories involving what she calls bad airs, and the things that travel in them. The physicians at the university have their own theories, the old miasma theory, the belief that disease is carried in the air itself, in bad smells and corruption. None of these theories is quite right. The closest to right is something that will not be articulated properly for another century. But the practical conclusion they all arrive at, clean the room, remove the filth, give the sick person cleaner air, is, by accident or by the slow accumulation of observed outcomes, not entirely wrong. You sweep the floor with the rush broom, the bristles scraping against the stone, the sound dry and repetitive. You empty the chamber pot into the shared privy in the close, holding your breath the way you always hold your breath at the privy door, the smell hitting you at 3 feet and becoming irrelevant only by full exposure. You open the window, just a crack, because the September air is cold and a cold room is bad for fever, and let the air move through. You shake out the blanket and the pallet cover. You wipe down the surfaces with a damp cloth. The room smells better afterward. Not good, because no room in this building at this level smells good in any absolute sense, but better. Less like sickness. More like a room where someone is getting better. You decide this is true and believe it. Around midday, a knock at the door. Your neighbour from across the landing, Agnes Baird, who has 5 children and a husband who works in the grass market, and a face that has seen a great deal without losing its fundamental warmth. Agnes always knows when someone is sick on the landing. She has some kind of perception for it, an antenna tuned to the particular frequencies of illness in a close community, and she appears at the door with a pot of something she calls kail brose, a thick green soup of kale and oatmeal that she makes in large quantities and distributes to the building with a calm generosity that she would die of embarrassment if you described in any formal terms. "I heard," she says by way of explanation. "You don't ask how, you take the pot." Agnes comes in anyway, looks at your mother, looks at you with a quick assessment and says, "She needs sweating more. Have you the extra blanket from the chest?" You have. You get it. Agnes tucks the blanket around your mother with the efficiency of someone who has done this dozens of times, and then she sits in the chair by the hearth, the chair that used to be your father's chair, and begins telling you without preamble everything she knows about chest fevers. Agnes Baird is not a healer in any formal sense. She has never trained, never been apprenticed, has no official knowledge of any kind. What she has is 23 years of raising children in a tenement in Edinburgh, which means 23 years of dealing with everything that can go wrong with the human body in the first years of life. Croup and colic and burning fevers and broken bones and the hundreds of small and medium and occasionally catastrophic things that happen to children in close-packed, cold, damp, smoke-filled environments. She has kept all 5 of her children alive to their current ages, which range from 4 to 17, and this is more than many people around her can say. Her knowledge is transmitted, the way all this knowledge is transmitted by women to women, across back fences and in each other's kitchens and in corridors outside sick rooms at 3 in the morning. A vast invisible curriculum, never written down, never formalized, subject to all the errors and superstitions that creep into any body of knowledge that has never been subjected to scrutiny, but containing within it, like ore in rock, genuine understanding won through long observation of what works and what doesn't. She tells you about the woman in Blair's Close who had the same cough 4 years ago and was dead in 3 weeks. She tells you about the man on the floor below who had what sounded like exactly the same thing 2 winters ago and recovered in a fortnight because his wife made him eat constantly, even when he wasn't hungry, especially when he wasn't hungry, because the fever burns through food, and a body fighting a fever cannot fight and starve at the same time. She tells you about the physician who came to the building once, called by a merchant's family who had taken a floor for a year, and who bled the merchant's wife and gave her something from a bottle, and charged 2 guineas for the privilege, and the merchant's wife was dead in 6 days. And the physician said this was because the disease was too advanced, and not because of anything he had done. Agnes Baird does not trust physicians. This is not an unusual position among women of her class in Edinburgh in 1753. The physicians are expensive and exclusive, and their relationship to illness, Agnes has observed, is not always improving the outcomes. This is an ungenerous way to put it. The truth is more complicated, as it always is. The medicine of 1753 is genuinely advancing, genuinely developing, genuinely producing insights that will matter enormously in the decades to come. But the advance is uneven, and the parts of medicine that are advancing fastest, anatomy, chemistry, the clinical observation that William Cullen is even now beginning to systematize at the university, these are not yet changing what happens in sick rooms on the 4th floor of tenements on the Lawnmarket, Not for people like Agnes Baird, not in any practical way. What changes, what happens in those sick rooms is women like Agnes, transmitting knowledge through conversation, and women like Mistress Crichton with her herbs, and the howdie wives who move through the city's closes like a parallel health system, visible to the people who need them and largely invisible to the men writing the medical textbooks. The howdie wife, Agnes says, as if reading your thought, which is alarming because you were thinking exactly that. If she's no better by evening, send for Margaret Irvine. I was going to, you say. Agnes nods. She considers this settled. She stays another half hour, which is half an hour of company in a situation where company is more useful than you want to admit. She tells you 3 more things about chest fevers, one of which you already knew, one of which is new and intriguing, and one of which is so clearly a superstition about the phase of the moon that you file it under not useful and move on. Then she takes her pot and goes back to her own rooms and her own 5 children, and her husband, who will be home from the grass market by 4 expecting supper. The afternoon comes in slowly, grey and cool. The light through the window changes from the thin brightness of midday to something more tentative, uncertain, the light of early autumn in Scotland, which does not commit itself to anything and reserves the right to go to rain at any moment. Your mother's fever has not broken. It has not, in your estimation, gotten worse, but it has not gotten better. It sits at the same terrible pitch it was at this morning. The skin too hot, the breathing too fast, the cough coming in waves and then retreating and then coming again. At 3 in the afternoon you make the decision you have been deferring since this morning. You send for Margaret Irvine. The howdie wife lives in a court off the Canongate, which is the lower section of the Royal Mile, east of St Giles and downhill from the Lawnmarket. It is perhaps a quarter of a mile, which in Edinburgh's geography means a descent of 100 feet and a navigation through a tangle of closes and winds and shortcuts that you have memorised over 3 years of using them. You send Tam, because you cannot leave your mother alone, and Tam can run the route in 10 minutes if he doesn't dawdle. And Tam, to his credit, never dawdles on anything important. He is back in 15 minutes. Not with Margaret Irvine, she will come when she comes, her schedule being organised around priorities you have no visibility into, but with the news that she is available and will come before evening, which is the best possible answer. The wait is hard. You make your mother drink. You make her drink the barley water and the herbal posset, and when she says she cannot drink any more, you let her rest for an hour, and then you make her drink again. You keep the fire going, rationing the coal carefully, spending what you need to spend and trying not to think about it. You add the pleurisy root to the next posset, the one Mistress Crichton gave you, and the sweating starts again, and you watch it the way you watch the fire as evidence of something happening, something working, something moving in the right direction. Around 4 o'clock your mother turns her head and looks at you with more clarity than she's had all day. You're fussing, she says. Her voice is rough, scored by hours of coughing, but it is more present than it's been. I'm attending, you say. There's difference. She almost smiles. What have you given me? Chamomile, elder, horehound, something from Mr. Affleck. A pause. She's doing the arithmetic you've been trying not to do in front of her. Margaret, she says, don't. Don't, you say again. It's fine. You're what matters. She closes her eyes. Not because the conversation is over, you know, but because she's conserving something, some resource that the fever is draining from her, and argument is not a good use of it. You sit with her. The fire pops. The street noise rises and falls outside. Somewhere in the building, one of Agnes Baird's children is singing something repetitive and slightly off-key, the kind of singing that goes on indefinitely and does not seem to require an audience. At 4:30, Margaret Irvine arrives. You have heard her before you see her. Her step on the stair is particular, a firm, confident step. Not the step of someone climbing to the 4th floor of a building because it is an imposition or a difficulty, but the step of someone who has climbed 4 floors in buildings like this hundreds of times, for whom this is simply part of the terrain of her work. She arrives at the door without knocking. She's been told to come, and she is here. Knocking would be superfluous, and she is in the room before you have quite finished the thought of opening the door for her. Margaret Irvine is 64 years old, and she looks it, and she does not look it in the same moment. She is stout and solid in the way of women who have spent their lives in physical work, with arms that have carried, and hands that have held, and a face that has seen a great deal and arranged itself accordingly. She wears a grey wool dress and a linen apron that is not entirely clean, evidence of the call before yours, and she carries a basket that she sets on the table with a clunk that suggests it contains more than herbs. She crosses to your mother without speaking to you first. This is her way, and you know it from report from the women who have told you about her. She goes to the patient before she goes to anyone else, because the patient is why she's here, and the patient's family can wait. She looks at your mother for a long moment. She looks at her the way Mistress Crichton looked at you when you described the symptoms, with the same kind of careful filing, but with something more to it. Something that comes from 60 years of watching people be sick. A pattern recognition that goes below the conscious level and operates on something more like instinct, though instinct is too simple a word for what is actually happening, which is the result of thousands of observations collapsing into something that looks like intuition. She puts her hand on your mother's forehead. She lifts her eyelids gently and looks at the colour of the whites of her eyes. She asks your mother to breathe, and she leans down and puts her ear against your mother's back and listens, and the listening is so attentive and so still that the room goes quiet. Even the street noise outside seems to recede. She straightens up. She looks at you. "How long?" she asks. "The cough has been there at least a week. The fever since last night when I noticed. Though I think the fever has been building longer," she nods. "What have you given her?" You tell her. Everything. Mistress Crichton's herbs, the compound from Mr. Affleck, the barley water with thyme, the goose grease. She listens to all of it with the same attentiveness she gave your mother's breathing. "Good," she says. "The Affleck compound is right. Keep giving it. The pleurisy root is right. The broth is right." She pauses. "The goose grease. Where are you applying it?" "Chest. Also the back, between the shoulder blades. The lungs go front and back. Keep the whole chest warm." She opens her basket. What she takes out of her basket is a small ceramic pot with a sealed top. A collection of linen cloths that have been folded with the care of something that has been folded and refolded many times. A bottle of something dark that is not laudanum. A different smell. Slightly aromatic. Herbal. And a small pouch of dried herbs that she begins measuring into the pot on the table with a pewter spoon that she produces from her apron pocket. "Mustard plaster," she says, gesturing at the ceramic pot. "I'll make one fresh, for the chest tonight. It goes on hot, covered with cloth, kept on for an hour, no longer. It burns, but it draws, and drawing is what we need." A mustard plaster. You know what this is. You have had one yourself as a child when you had a cough that wouldn't go. The burning quality of mustard against skin, penetrating, insistent, impossible to ignore, and underneath the discomfort something happening in the tissue, some dilation, some loosening of what has tightened. The other thing, Margaret Irvine says, mixing something into the pot with her spoon, not looking up, is this. She indicates the dark bottle. Coltsfoot and elecampane in an infusion of honey and the juice of black currant. For the throat. She's been coughing so long the throat is raw, and a raw throat fights you when you're trying to swallow, and you need her to swallow. She looks up at you now. The fever is not, at this moment, beyond what I would expect. The colour in her face is not good, but it is not the colour of something that has gone too far. The chest sound. She pauses, choosing her words. There is congestion. There is fluid where there should not be. The compound from Affleck with the ipecacuanha, this is correct. The body needs to move that fluid out. We help it move. We keep her warm and we keep her drinking and we help the body do what it is already trying to do. She says this as if the body is a thing with its own intentions, its own logic, its own intelligence, as if her job and your job is to support that intelligence rather than override it. It is a way of thinking about illness that is simultaneously folk wisdom and something that sounds to your ears in this century more modern than the humoral theory with its bleeding and its purging and its abstract philosophy of imbalance. And if it doesn't turn, you ask? The question that has been sitting at the bottom of everything all day. Margaret Irvine looks at you. Then we make different decisions, she says. But we don't make those decisions tonight. Tonight we work with what we have, and we see what the morning brings. She stays for 2 hours. In those 2 hours she applies the mustard plaster, which makes your mother hiss through her teeth at the first contact, that burning, insistent heat, and you hold her hands while Margaret holds the cloth in place and watches the time, because the plaster must come off at exactly the right moment, not before it has done its work and not after it has done more than it should. When it comes off, the skin beneath is bright red, and your mother is sweating, and the sweating is the good kind, the productive kind, the fever working itself out through the skin the way it's supposed to. She gives her the dark honey infusion, spoonful by slow spoonful, and your mother swallows it with the grimace of someone who does not particularly enjoy the taste but who has decided to cooperate, which is a good sign. People who have decided to cooperate are people who are fighting. People who have stopped fighting are something else. She talks to you while she works, about your mother's lungs and what she thinks is in them, about the importance of the broth and the water and the position she should sleep in, not flat but slightly propped, because lying flat when there is fluid in the chest is harder. About the signs to watch for overnight, the signs that the fever is moving in the right direction, and the signs that would mean something different and would mean you need to make those different decisions she mentioned. She talks to Tam as well. She gives him specific instructions, his instructions, things he's responsible for, every hour through the night, a cup of warm liquid, anything warm, it does not matter what. Every hour, check that she is still sweating. Every hour, tell your sister how she looks. She talks to him as an adult because the situation requires him to be one, and he listens with the focused intensity of a 12-year-old who understands that something important is being asked of him. When she leaves, she takes only what she would have taken anyway, a small payment, less than you expected, significantly less than Mr. Affleck, and she goes with the same firm step she arrived with, down the stairs, back out into the city, back to whatever comes next on the list of people who need her. You stand in the middle of the room after she leaves. Your mother is sleeping. The sweating has slowed, but not stopped. The breathing is still not right, but it is slightly slower, slightly less effortful, though that might be the posset working and the effect might be temporary. Tam looks at you from across the room. She'll be all right, he says. It is not entirely a question. Yes, you say. It is not entirely a statement. The night is long. You and Tam between you keep the fire going. Keep the cups of warm liquid coming. Keep the blankets tucked. Keep the room at the temperature Margaret Irvine specified, warm but not stifling. You sleep in shifts, brief, shallow, attentive sleep. The sleep of someone listening even while unconscious, tuned to the sounds of another person breathing. At 2 a.m, your mother's breathing changes. It changes for the better. Slower, deeper. Less of that terrible catch in it. Less of the rapid, shallow rhythm of her body working too hard. You wake from your half-sleep on the floor beside her pallet and put your hand on her forehead and feel, for the first time in this long day, a difference. The fever is breaking, not gone, not suddenly and dramatically dissolved in the way that happens sometimes, the sudden drenching sweat and the immediate clarity, but loosening, the terrible density of it, the hardness of the heat that has been under your hand all day, it is loosening, becoming less itself, becoming something more like the heat of someone who is warm and tired rather than the heat of something wrong. You sit back on your heels on the cold stone floor and breathe. Tam is asleep. His head is resting on his arms at the table. You can hear him from across the room, that same steady 12-year-old breathing, finally unconscious after hours of trying to be useful. You let him sleep. You stay by your mother's pallet and listen to her breathe and watch the fire and wait for the morning. The morning comes the way it always comes in Edinburgh. First a faint light, barely distinguishable from darkness at the window. Then the bells, St. Giles leading, the others following. Then the sounds of the building waking around you. Above and below, the creak of floors and the sound of voices. Your mother opens her eyes. They're clearer than they have been in days. Still tired, deeply tired, the kind of tired that takes a week of sleep to cure, but clear. The fever brightness is gone. In its place is something more ordinary, more present, more like herself. "You're still here," she says. Her voice is rough still, scored by the coughing. "Where else would I be?" She looks round the room, the fire low now but still going. Tam asleep at the table, the empty cups, the smell of herbs. "Margaret Irvine?" she asks. "Came yesterday, stayed 2 hours. She closes her eyes again. "What did it cost?" "Does it matter?" "Margaret, it's fine, you say. Is all fine." The cough comes again. One more time, but it is different now. Looser, more productive. The ipecacuanha from yesterday's compound still working, still moving what needs to move. She coughs until she's done coughing, and then she lies back, exhausted, and you give her the last of the barley water, cooled now to lukewarm, and she drinks it without argument. "You need to sleep," she says. "So do you." "I mean properly, not on the floor." "I'm fine on the floor." She makes a sound that is almost an exasperated laugh, but is mostly just exasperation, and she closes her eyes, and you sit in the chair by the cooling fire, and you are asleep in 3 minutes, so completely and so instantly that you don't feel it happening. You sleep until 9. This is the longest you have slept in 2 days, and you know it from the quality of the waking, the disorientation of someone who has gone deeper than usual, the body insisting on recovery even when the mind is still running the calculations of the situation. Your mother is awake and sitting up, This is new. Sitting up on her own without being propped or assisted is a different level of function than yesterday. The fever is not gone. You can see the slight flush in her face, the too bright quality of her eyes, but it is so much less than it was that the difference constitutes a change in category rather than degree. Tam is no longer at the table. He has gone out, you realise, looking at the emptiness of the room, with the slightly surreal quality of having slept past your usual waking time. He has gone out and the water bucket is full, which means he went to the well and came back while you were sleeping, and there is bread on the table that was not there last night, which means he went to the bakery on the close, and the fire is burning steadily, which means he added coal while you were sleeping. He has done, in the time you were unconscious, exactly what you would have done. You put your face in your hands for a moment, not in despair, in something else, in the recognition of how much you love your brother, this quiet, competent 12-year-old boy who carried water and built the fire and let you sleep. He went for more broth ingredients, your mother says. Her voice is still rough but stronger than yesterday. I told him what to get. He had a few pennies left from running errands. He'll be back soon. You pour a cup of water and bring it to her. She takes it with both hands, which is a good sign. Yesterday she would barely close her fingers around a cup. The howdie wife said propped, you say, and you arrange the rolled blanket behind her so that she's sitting up rather than lying flat the way Margaret Irvine specified. I know what Margaret Irvine said, your mother says, with a faint edge of her usual personality returning, that slight acidity, that insistence on her own knowledge and competence. You're so glad to hear it that you almost laugh. You make her drink the last of the honey infusion that Margaret Irvine left. You heat more water and make chamomile, which at this point you could make in your sleep, which is appropriate since you basically have. You make yourself eat some bread because your own body has been on short rations for 2 days, and there is no useful purpose served by you becoming the second casualty of this situation. The morning passes differently from yesterday. Less terror. Less the sensation of standing over an abyss and trying to decide what to do with both hands. More simply the work of recovery. The cups and the warmth and the broth that Tam comes back with, and you make properly this time, with a soup bone he somehow talked the butcher into giving him for almost nothing, probably by standing outside the shop in that particular way he has, patient and self-contained, until the butcher felt the situation more keenly than he would have liked. Mistress Crichton comes down in the early afternoon. She looks at your mother, asks her several questions, presses on her chest lightly, a gesture that makes your mother wince, but which Mistress Crichton says tells her what she wants to know, and pronounces that the worst is past, that the congestion is lessening, that the next week will be recovery, and the week after that your mother should be careful not to go back to full work too quickly. The women who relapse, Mistress Crichton says, relapse because they go back to work before the lungs are finished healing. The lungs take longer than you think. The fever breaks and you feel yourself, and then you go out in the cold, or you lift too much, or you overdo it in some way, and the chest opens again, and the second time is harder than the first. Your mother, who had clearly been calculating when she could go back to the laundry, has the grace to look slightly caught. Rest, Mistress Crichton says. Drink, eat, let the family manage for another fortnight. A fortnight, your mother says, as if the word is slightly absurd. A fortnight, Mistress Crichton says with the finality of someone who is not negotiating. She goes back upstairs. You sit in the chair by the fire and look at your mother, and your mother looks at you, and neither of you says what you're both thinking about, which is the fortnight and the money and the calculation of the margin. I can take on extra work, you say. You already have extra work. More extra work. You work as a seamstress, not as a primary profession, not as a formal apprenticeship, but the way a lot of women in Edinburgh work, informally, by reputation, taking work from households that need it and doing it in your own rooms when your own household work permits. You're reasonably good at it. You're not brilliant, not the kind of seamstress who produces work that merchants' wives seek out by name, but you are competent and reliable, and you deliver on time, which in Edinburgh's informal economy of domestic work is worth more than you might think. I'll manage it, you say. Your mother is quiet for a moment. Outside, the street goes on being itself. The bells have just struck 2. You're so like him, she says, not accusingly, not even particularly sadly, just as a statement of observation, of recognition. She means your father. She means his particular way of handling crisis, which was calm arithmetic and practical action, and the refusal to do anything so inefficient as panic. She means the way he always knew what could be managed and what couldn't, and directed his energy toward the former without sentiment. You don't know what to say to this, so you say nothing, which is the right choice. She closes her eyes. You pick up your needle. The following days have a different quality from the crisis. Recovery is quieter than illness. It is the slow coming back of things, your mother's voice returning to its full range, the flush fading from her face, the cough becoming shallower and less frequent and finally almost entirely gone by the end of the first week. She is still weak. She sleeps more than usual. She sits in the chair by the fire rather than standing at the laundry tubs, which is a difference she finds deeply irritating but which she is complying with, because Mistress Crichton made it very clear what the consequences of not complying would be, and your mother, whatever else she is, takes seriously the advice of people who know what they're talking about. You are busy. Tam is busy. The household runs on its smaller version of itself, the version where your mother is present but not working, which is both better than the version where she was absent entirely in her fever, and harder than the ordinary version where she carries her full share. You take the extra sewing work. You take more than you should probably take, enough that you're working until midnight every evening, the candle burning low, your eyes aching with the close work, your fingers developing small calluses on the tips from where the needle goes through. You're making handkerchiefs and caps and mending shirts and altering a dress for a woman on the floor above, and the money comes in the small amounts that accumulate when you add them up at the end of each day into something that covers what was spent and almost covers the deficit. Almost, but almost is workable. Almost means you're not yet at the edge of the spiral. One afternoon, in the second week of your mother's recovery, you go out for barley and you take the long way back. The long way back from the market, the way that goes down the high street and past the university buildings and through the close that comes out near the bottom of Surgeon Square, is not a route you normally take. It is out of your way. But today, for no particular reason that you can name, you take it. Surgeon Square is not a square in any grand sense. It is a space, roughly rectangular, surrounded by buildings that house the university's medical faculty and the premises of the Incorporation of Surgeons and the various buildings associated with Edinburgh's extraordinary density of medical activity. The medical school has been here since 1726, and in the decades since then it has become what people are starting to call one of the finest medical schools in the world. Students come from England and from the continent and from America to study here. They come to hear William Cullen lecture on the theory and practice of medicine. They come to see the anatomy demonstrations, the dissection theatre, where cadavers are cut open in front of audiences of students who take notes in the cold room and argue about what they see. You know about this place the way you know about the Palace of Holyrood House, which is to say, you know it exists and you know it is important and it is not somewhere you normally have any occasion to go. Today you stand at the edge of the square and look at the buildings. They are serious buildings, stone-faced, relatively new, the kind of buildings that say this is where important things happen, without quite shouting it. Students move in and out of the doors in twos and threes, talking with the animation of people who have been in a lecture and have thoughts to discharge. They are young, mostly, men entirely, dressed well, not expensively, not the silk coats of the Royal Mile merchants, but the decent wool of people whose families have money enough for their education, but not so much that they've gone idle with it. One of them nearly walks into you. He stops. He is perhaps 20, with a sharp-nosed face and ink-stained fingers, and an expression of someone who was thinking very hard about something that had nothing to do with navigation. "Sorry," he says. His accent is not Scottish. English, south of England, the softer vowels. "No harm," you say. He looks at you. Properly looks. The look of someone coming back from wherever his thoughts were, and something in your face or your expression, or the way you're looking at the buildings makes him pause. "First time here?" he asks. There is no condescension in it, just curiosity. "I walk past," you say. "But I don't usually stop." He nods. He looks at the buildings himself for a moment, as if seeing them through your eyes, with the fresh perception that the familiar requires an outside observer to provide. "I've been here 3 months," he says. "From London. I'm studying under Dr. Cullen." "I've heard the name," you say. Everyone in Edinburgh has heard the name. William Cullen is already what he will be remembered as. The man who is reorganizing the whole way physicians think about disease, replacing the old humoral theory with something more systematic, more empirical, more grounded in observation than in ancient authority. "What do you study?" you ask. It is not a question you would normally ask of a man you don't know, a man who is clearly educated and well above your station. But there is something about the situation, the frankness of the collision, the equality of the moment of near collision on the street, that makes it feel permissible. "Fevers," he says, then slightly self-conscious. "Among other things, but fevers particularly. The mechanism of fever, what causes the body to generate heat in response to disease." You look at him. "Someone in my family just had one," you say. "A chest fever. A week of it." "Are they recovered?" "Recovering." "What did you do for it?" The question has the quality of genuine professional curiosity. The student who is learning by asking everyone, not just the lecturers. You tell him everything. The chamomile and the elderflower and the pleurisy root. The compound from Mr. Affleck with the ipecacuanha. The mustard plaster. The broth. The position. What Margaret Irvine said and did. The sweating and the fever breaking at 2 a.m. He listens to all of it with more attention than you expected, and his face goes through several expressions, some of which are the expressions of someone encountering things they recognize, and some of which are the expressions of someone encountering things that are new to them. "The pleurisy root," he says. "That's interesting. There's been some writing about its diaphoretic properties, the sweating it induces." He pauses. "Dr. Cullen believes the fever is the body's response to some irritation in the nervous system." The heat is a consequence of the body attempting to resolve the irritation, which means he catches himself, looks at you. I'm sorry, this is probably not interesting. It is interesting, you say, and you mean it, with a directness that surprises him. The mustard plaster, he says. That's not something we discuss in lectures. Where did your healer learn it? From someone who learned it from someone. How most things get learned. He nods at this slowly as if he finds it more profound than you meant it to be. Most of what we know about fever, he says, came from people like your healer, from observation over generations. We're just now beginning to write it down and organise it. But the observation came first. The theory comes later, trying to explain what has already been learned by practice. You think about your grandmother, about Agnes Baird with her kail brose, about Mistress Crichton with her shelf of jars, about Margaret Irvine in her grey dress, her ear against your mother's back, listening to the sound of fluid in lungs. 60 years of careful observation applied to your mother's chest at 4 p.m. She's a good healer, you say, the howdie wife who came. I know, he says, with a slight emphasis that suggests this is not news to him, that the howdie wives of Edinburgh are something the students of the medical school are more aware of than the medical school's official positions might suggest. I've been talking to some of them, trying to learn what they know. You look at him with something slightly different from how you were looking at him before. Does Dr. Cullen know you're doing that? He grins. It is the grin of someone who has thought about this. He would probably consider it empirical research, he says, which he approves of in principle. The conversation ends the way such conversations end naturally, without awkwardness, with the mutual recognition that two people who have met by accident in a street have each given the other something useful, and neither owes the other anything further. He goes back to his lecture notes. You go back to your barley and your close, and your mother's recovery. But you walk home thinking about what he said. The theory comes later, trying to explain what has already been learned by practice. Your grandmother knew things she had no way of explaining. Your mother knows things she has no formal language for. Mistress Crichton knows things, and Margaret Irvine knows things, and Agnes Baird knows things, and the things they know kept your mother alive through a week of fever when there was no physician within a mile who would have come without a fee you could not pay. And somewhere in Surgeon Square, a young Englishman with ink on his fingers is trying to write it all down. A week later, your mother is well enough to sit at the window. This is the measure you've been using without quite naming it. The day she can sit at the window and look out at the Lawnmarket below, at the city she's been living in for 3 years, and which she's not entirely sure she loves, but which she has accepted as the context of her life. When she can sit at the window, she is better. She sits at the window on a Sunday morning in the 2nd week of October, wrapped in a shawl with a cup of chamomile tea that she's drinking out of habit now rather than need, watching the street below. You and Tam go to Arthur's seat. This is Tam's idea, or rather it is the idea that has been building in him for weeks. The idea of an escape, a few hours outside the tenement, outside the sick room, outside the close confines of the recovery. He proposes it with the careful approach of someone who knows how to pitch a request to someone who might say no for practical reasons. She'll be fine for a few hours, he says. Mistress Crichton will look in. Agnes will look in. We'll be back by noon. You know he's right. You also know that your own body has been inside for too long. Your own eyes have been on close work and dim rooms. Your own lungs have been breathing the indoor air of the tenement, and Arthur's seat is outside. Arthur's Seat is the volcanic hill that rises from the eastern end of Edinburgh, south of the Canongate above the palace, visible from almost everywhere in the city. It is 700 feet high, which is not enormous but is enough, in the context of this flat valley with its ridge of tenements, to feel like a different world from the street below. Grass and rock and wind and the sky without buildings in it. Open sky. The kind of sky you can look at for a long time without seeing the edge of a tenement on either side. You walk through the Sunday streets, quieter than the weekday streets. The Sabbath enforced by law and by the particular Scottish religious atmosphere that makes public commerce on Sunday an exercise in moral risk, and down through the Canongate and out through the Netherbow Port, the gate in the city wall, into the area beyond that leads toward the palace and the park. The park is royal land, but it is accessible, and on a Sunday morning in October it is full of people who have had the same idea you have, who are seeking for a few hours the kind of space that the city denies them the rest of the week. Families with children running ahead on the grass, couples walking slowly arm in arm at the pace of people who have nowhere urgent to be, old men sitting on rocks in the thin October sun, their faces turned up to the light with the expression of plants seeking warmth. You climb. The path up Arthur's Seat is not well maintained in any formal sense. It is the path that has been worn by feet over generations, by everyone who has wanted to get to the top by roughly the same route. It goes uphill in a way that starts gentle and becomes less gentle, through the grass and then over the rocks, and by the time you reach the top your lungs are working and your legs have the good warm ache of real physical effort. Tam gets there before you. He is 12 and has the knees of something that is not quite human yet in its relationship with inclines. He stands at the top with his arms out, the wind taking his coat and his hair, grinning at the view. The view. You come up the last of the rocks and you stop. Edinburgh spreads below you and ahead of you and around you. The ridge of the old town running west to east, the castle at the far end, then the Lawnmarket, then the High Street, then the Canongate, the closes and courts cutting away north and south, the buildings stacked, the chimneys smoking, the whole packed extraordinary organism of 60,000 lives, spread out beneath you like a map that has been folded too many times and is now permanently rumpled. Nothing quite flat, nothing quite symmetrical, everything at an angle to everything else. The Norloch is visible from here, the dark water in the valley to the north, the southern edge of the new town plan that is even now being discussed, being drawn, being debated in the town council chambers. They plan to build a rational, ordered city on the other side of the valley, away from the medieval chaos of the ridge, with streets wide enough for air and light, with drains and sewers and water supplies, with all the things that the old town does not have, and that the people of the old town are too deep in the routines of managing without to quite imagine. The Firth of Forth is visible to the north, on clear days, on the clear days you get occasionally in October between one rain system and the next. Today is one of those days. The water is silver in the October light, wide and flat, and beyond it the hills of Fife on the far shore, and further still the line where land and sky meet, the edge of the world that the ships sail past on their way to somewhere. Tam sits down on a rock and eats an apple he's produced from some pocket in his coat. He eats it with the methodical satisfaction of a boy who's been walking uphill and has deserved his apple. You stand and look at the city. From up here, the density of it is more visible than it is from inside. From inside, living in it, you experience the density as a series of immediate facts. The smell, the noise, the press of bodies, the constant negotiation with other people's space and schedules and needs. From up here, you see the system of it. You see the ridge and the closes that flow off it like tributaries of a river. You see the smoke rising from 10,000 chimneys and forming a single pall above the ridge that drifts south in the wind and gradually disperses. You see in miniature the carts and pedestrians and horses that make the city move. And you see, or you imagine you can see, all the sick rooms in all those buildings, all the people lying in the dark on straw pallets, all the coughs that come and go in the night, all the families like yours calculating margins and sending for howdy wives and making possets from herbs bought in the market, all the fevers breaking or not breaking at 2 a.m. Edinburgh in 1753 is not by any measure a healthy city. The density makes it a propagation system for disease. The water supply makes it a vector. The cold and the damp and the overcrowding and the coal smoke in the lungs make the chest complaints a constant. People die of things that are, in the following century, preventable. They die of things that, in the century after that, are curable. They die in rooms like yours, in buildings like yours, attended by women like Mistress Crichton and Margaret Irvine, doing the best they can with what they have, which is sometimes enough and sometimes isn't. And they also survive. Your mother survived. Your father did not 2 years ago, but your mother has, and the difference is not, you think, the nature of the illness alone. The difference is also the care. The woman above who gave you herbs, the woman across the hall who came with soup, the howdy wife who came at 4 p.m. and stayed 2 hours and made the mustard plaster fresh, and listened to your mother's lungs. All of that care, transmitted through a system that has no name and no official standing, that exists in the relationships between women in a tenement building, that is powered by nothing more formal than the knowledge that you will need help, and so will give help, that you have needed help, and so will give help. The simple reciprocity of life lived close enough together that the suffering of one person is the problem of everyone nearby. The wind picks up. The October chill in it is real, is the chill that says the summer is entirely gone and winter is 6 weeks away. We should go back, Tam says. He has finished his apple. He's looking at the city too. In a minute, you say. You look at Edinburgh below you. The smoke and the crowds and the closes. The invisible curriculum of women's knowledge, moving through the buildings in conversation, in cups of soup brought across landings, in the step of a howdy wife on a stair. The medical school in its buildings near Surgeon Square, where a young man with ink on his fingers is asking the howdy wives what they know, trying to write it down, trying to make the invisible visible. Your mother at the window, wrapped in her shawl, drinking chamomile tea. All right, you say. Let's go back. The weeks turn. October goes into November, and November goes into winter, with the abruptness that Scottish weather considers appropriate. The temperature dropping in a matter of days from cold to genuinely cold, the kind of cold that gets into the stone of the tenement walls and stays there until March, that turns the water in the washing basin to ice by morning, that makes your breath visible in the room, and makes getting out from under the blanket a decision requiring significant motivation. Your mother goes back to the laundry work in the 3rd week of October, a week earlier than Mistress Crichton recommended, because the money situation is what it is, and because your mother is not a person who accepts limitation gracefully. She is more careful than she would have been before the illness. She's not entirely recovered. You can hear it in her breathing in the evenings, a slight reediness that was not there before September, a quality to her voice when she speaks that is different from what it was. But she is working. She is managing. She has made the accommodations that the illness requires of her, and she is getting on with it. This is what recovery looks like in Edinburgh in 1753. Not complete restoration to what you were before. Something more like adaptation. The body changed by what it went through, carrying the mark of the illness the way stone carries the marks of the weather, altered but not destroyed, functional but differently so. You take on less of the extra sewing work as the household income restores itself. You keep some of it, because the habits you've formed in crisis, the inventory of what you have and what you need, the attention to the margin, the careful spending, these habits do not entirely dissolve when the crisis is over. They become part of how you manage, part of what you know about how the world works. The coal situation is better because November in Edinburgh means the coal merchants are doing their best business of the year, and competition produces, if not good prices, then slightly better prices than July. You buy enough to get through the worst of what's coming. You buy it in a single trip, in the largest quantity you can carry, and you store it in the box your father built for the purpose, under the window. And every time you open the lid and see it there, sufficient, enough, you feel something that is not quite but is related to security. Mistress Crichton teaches you over these weeks more about the herbs. Not because you ask her to. Formally, she would not respond well to a formal request, which would feel to her like a performance of something that ought to be simple, but because you start coming upstairs to return the things you borrowed, and these returns turn into conversations, and the conversations turn into her showing you things and explaining things, and over time this becomes something that resembles instruction. You learn the difference between the herbs that work by what she calls drawing, and the herbs that work by what she calls warming. You learn which ones are safe for children and which require more caution. You learn that willow bark, which she keeps in a sealed jar and measures carefully, is good for the kind of pain that comes with fever, the bone ache, the headache, and that it works better for this than almost anything else she has, though she cannot tell you why and you cannot tell her why, though both of you, without knowing the mechanism, are in the vicinity of something that will not be properly understood for another century. You learn that the Howdie Wife network in Edinburgh is more organised than you knew, that Margaret Irvine knows 15 other women who work as Howdie wives in different parts of the city, that they share information with each other, that when a new pattern of illness appears in one part of the city, the others know within days through this informal network, and that this network has been the city's actual disease monitoring system for as long as anyone can remember. No one in the town council knows it exists. No one in the medical school has thought to study it. But it exists, and it functions, and it has been keeping Edinburgh's poorer inhabitants alive with competence and dedication, and no recognition of any kind. You think about the young man from London with his ink-stained fingers and his interviews with the Howdie wives, and you hope he writes it down carefully. You hope he writes it down in a way that names the women and gives them credit. You suspect he will not, because the mechanisms of written history in 1753 are not organised for that kind of credit, but you hope it anyway. Winter deepens. The closes become treacherous with ice in the mornings, the moisture from 1,000 households, freezing on the stone steps and the stone pavement of the alley, so that every journey down to the street requires the careful, shuffling attention of someone who knows that a fall on these steps will not be gentle. The Norloch gives off its winter smell, which is different from its summer smell in that the cold suppresses some of the worst of it. The fermentation, but adds a damp mineral quality that gets into your clothes and your hair and persists. The city's illnesses change with the season. Summer brings the belly complaints, the flux and the diarrhea that run through buildings when the water is at its worst, and the stored food has been at its most compromised by heat. Winter brings the chest complaints, the coughs and fevers and the congestions that take root in lungs already weakened by months of breathing coal smoke in enclosed rooms. It is as if Edinburgh has two diseases, one for each half of the year, rotating with the seasons like crops. Tam grows. He grows the way boys grow in the winter, suddenly and discontinuously. The clothes that fit in September not fitting in December. The cuffs of his coat now several inches above his wrists, his boots needing to be replaced. You find him a pair of boots, not new. New boots are not possible, but in good condition, bought from a man on the high street who has a stall of second-hand goods, and they fit him well enough that he does not complain, which is Tam's version of approval. Your mother's breathing improves slowly through November and into December. The readiness in her voice fades. The slight extra effort she's been putting into breathing becomes, gradually, the ordinary effort of breathing, unnoticeable because it requires no attention. By Christmas, not that Christmas is a major celebration in Edinburgh's Presbyterian culture, which views it with the suspicion it reserves for anything that might be too enjoyable. By Christmas she is, to your observation, substantially recovered. Not completely. You don't think the lungs are completely what they were before September. There is still something there, some memory the tissue has kept, some change wrought by what it went through, but it is not threatening anymore. It is the ordinary legacy of an illness that has passed, the kind of trace that many people carry and manage for years, and that does not, in the end, define the trajectory of their lives. She is alive. She is working. She is sitting at the table in the evenings and complaining about the laundry work and asking Tam too many questions about his day and arguing with you about how much coal to put on the fire. She is entirely herself. This is the success condition. Not perfect health, not the complete erasure of what happened. Just herself, in the room, present, and arguing and alive. One evening in January, sitting by the fire after supper, your mother looks up from her mending. "You did well," she says. "You look up from your own work." "With the illness," she says, "when I was at my worst. You did everything right." This is not something your mother says easily. This is not a woman who distributes praise loosely, who considers it necessary to confirm aloud what ought to be obvious. When she says it, it matters. "I had help," you say. "You organised the help." That's not nothing. She goes back to her mending. You go back to your work. The fire pops. The street is quiet outside, January cold, keeping even the usual night sounds muffled and sparse. "Mistress Crichton," your mother says after a while, "she's been teaching you things." "Some things." "Good." A pause. "It's worth knowing." There are women in this city who know a great deal, and the knowing doesn't go anywhere, it just ends when they end. It should go somewhere. You think about this. About Mistress Crichton's shelf of jars, about the 62 years of knowledge accumulated there, never written down, never formalized, existing only in the mind of the woman who collected it, and in the conversation she's had with the women who have come to her in need. It should go somewhere. "I'll keep learning," you say. She nods, satisfied, done with the subject. Outside, Edinburgh settles into its winter night. The watchman calls the hour somewhere on the high street, his voice carrying through the cold, clear air. St. Giles answers distantly, with its bell. The city breathes. In February there is another illness on your landing. Not your family this time. The family across from Agnes Baird, a young family, newly arrived, a husband who works in a tannery and a wife of 22, with a child of 18 months and another child obviously coming in the spring. The 18-month-old gets the fever, the kind that comes on suddenly and hard in very small children, the kind that goes from nothing to alarming in a matter of hours. You hear the crying through the wall at 11 in the evening, the kind of crying that is different from ordinary crying, that has a quality of wrongness to it, a pitch that your body responds to before your mind has processed why. You go across the landing. The young wife is 19. Her name is Jean. She's been in Edinburgh for 5 months and does not know the building well and does not know its network of knowledge and assistance. She's sitting on the floor with a child in her arms, rocking, her face the face of someone who does not know what to do and is doing the only thing she can think of, which is hold the child and rock and wait for something to change. The fever in the child is real and strong. You feel it the moment you touch the small forehead. You do not ask permission. You go upstairs to Mistress Crichton. You go across the landing to Agnes Baird. You do not go for a Margaret Irvine yet, because you do not know if it is bad enough for that. In the next half hour, the landing fills quietly with women. Not dramatically, not with fuss, not with the performance of a crisis that makes everything harder. Just quietly, methodically, each person with her knowledge and her hands. Mistress Crichton with her herbs, Agnes with the kail brose she apparently always has ready, in a way that suggests she's thought about this possibility, that the new family on the landing is something she's been watching with readiness. You with what you have learned, standing in the doorway of the bedroom while Mistress Crichton takes the child and puts her on the bed, and begins the assessment you have watched her do before. The same careful reading of the body that she did with your mother. The same attention. The same systematic observation. Jean sits on the edge of the bed, very still, watching everything. She'll be all right, you say. You say it because it seems true, because the fever in the child is not the same quality as what was in your mother. It does not have that settled-in feel of something that has been building for days. It has the sharp, sudden quality of something that has just arrived and can just as quickly leave if the body gets the right help. How do you know? Jean asks. I don't know for certain, you say, but I've seen worse. This is true. You have seen worse, and more importantly, you have helped through worse. And you're standing here in this doorway with that experience and with Mistress Crichton's knowledge and with Agnes's soup and with the herbs from the shelf upstairs. And all of that is real. All of that is what the child has access to on this landing tonight. Jean looks at you. She is 19 and frightened and far from wherever home was, and you are the nearest thing to authority she can see. Tell me what to do, she says. You tell her. You tell her everything you know. About the chamomile and the elderflower and the warm water, measured carefully, not too much, not too little. About keeping the child warm but not overheated. About the sweating and what to look for to tell if it's going the right way. About the broth and the liquids and the position. About the signs that would mean something different. The signs that would mean you need to go for Margaret Irvine regardless of the hour. You tell her all of it in the same voice that Mistress Crichton used with you. The voice of someone passing on knowledge rather than performing competence. The voice that says, this is what I know, it is real, it will help, here is how to use it. The child's fever breaks before dawn, not dramatically, quietly, the same way your mother's broke, in the small hours when everything is still. A gradual loosening of the heat, the skin cooling slowly, the breathing finding its regular rhythm, the child falling into proper sleep instead of the fevered unconsciousness of the previous hours. Jean sits in the chair beside the bed with the child in her arms, and the relief on her face is so complete it is almost painful to look at. "Thank you," she says, "to all of you, to all of the landing, to whatever it is that the landing has turned out to be." Mistress Crichton gathers her things. Agnes goes back to her own room. You linger for a moment. "You know where we are now," you say, "if you need anything." Jean looks up at you. There are tear tracks on her face. The tears that come after the fear is past. The bodies are counting. "How did you all know to come?" she asks. "I didn't call for anyone." "We heard," you say. "We were listening." This is what it means to live in Edinburgh in 1753, in a building like yours, on a landing like yours. It means you are never quite alone in it. The city presses in from every direction. The noise and the smell and the cold and the darkness and the illness that moves through the buildings like water through stone. All of that is real, and none of it is comfortable, and some of it is genuinely terrible. The kind of terrible that would have broken your heart if you'd known, before you came here, what exactly you were coming to. But the building is also full of women who were listening when they heard the crying. Women who have knowledge that lives in their hands and in their memories and in their relationships with the plants on their shelves. Women who come across the landing at midnight without being asked because that is what the landing requires of them. This is the other medicine. Not the medicine in Surgeon Square with its dissection theatres and its brilliant lecturers and its systematic drive toward a science that will, in the fullness of time, change everything. The medicine that lives between those two poles, in the shelf of jars upstairs and in the strong practical arms of the howdie wife, and in the conversation across the landing where one woman tells another what her grandmother told her, and some of it is wrong and some of it is right, and the right parts are the result of generations of careful watching. Women watching other women's bodies, keeping track of what worked and what didn't, building something that has no name but that is, in its own way, knowledge. The young Englishman in Surgeon Square is trying to write it down. He is trying to understand what the howdie wives know, and to put it in language that will travel, that will survive into the future, that will connect the practice to the theory. You hope he succeeds. You hope someone reads what he writes. But even if no one does, even if the knowledge never makes it into a book, it will keep moving. From woman to woman, from landing to landing, from the shelf of Mistress Crichton to whatever shelf will carry it next. That is how it has always moved. That is how it moves now. Spring comes eventually. Spring comes to Edinburgh with the particular relief of a city that has spent 4 months proving it can survive another winter. The light changes first, the angle of it, the quality of the morning light coming through the window in a direction it hasn't come from since October. Then the temperature, which rises with agonizing slowness but does rise, the stone of the tenement walls finally releasing the cold they've been holding since November. The market fills out. The herb women reappear with fresh stock, the early spring plants, the things you cannot dry and keep, the nettles and the young elder shoots and the green things that have not been available since October. Mistress Crichton goes to the market herself on the first warm Saturday in April, which you know because she comes back with a basket full of green things and a look of satisfaction that you have not seen on her face since the summer. Your mother is fully herself. The last trace of the chest complaint is gone, dissolved by winter and spring and the slow healing of tissue that was damaged and has repaired. She is stronger than she was last September, which sounds wrong but is not wrong, because surviving an illness and recovering well from it is its own kind of strengthening, the body having proved what it can do. Tam has grown 3 more inches, and his voice has started doing things that he finds embarrassing and you find entertaining, and your mother finds a source of enormous pride that she expresses by pretending not to notice it. The building's illnesses ebb with the season. The winter chest complaints recede. The network of the landing returns to its ordinary state. Not active crisis mode, but the latent readiness, the awareness of each other that means the crying of a child will be heard through a wall and responded to. Jean's second child is born in May, a daughter. Margaret Irvine attends the birth because that is her primary work, the work that fills her days and nights, the work that she has been doing for 40 years, bringing children into the world and sitting with women through the hardest hours. The birth is straightforward. Jean's husband walks the landing back and forth for 4 hours and does not handle it with particular grace, and Agnes Baird brings him ale and tells him firmly to stop pacing. The baby is named Jean Margaret, after her mother and after the Howdie wife. This is not a custom that anyone would record in the official histories of Edinburgh, but it happens more often than you might think, in the closes and courts of the old town, the naming of children after the women who brought them through. On an evening in June, long evening, the Scottish summer light holding until 10 at night in a way that never entirely stops being surprising, you sit at the window with your mother and Tam and watch Edinburgh below you. The Lawnmarket is settling into its evening mode. The market stalls are down. The carts are gone. The fishwives have been gone since noon. What is left is the ordinary evening traffic of the city, people moving between their work and their homes and their taverns and the night. The closes are filling with the evening shadows that pool in them, even when the sky above is still light. In an hour they will be dark, genuinely dark, and the link boys will be at the corners with their torches. The castle at the end of the ridge catches the evening light on its western face, the old stone going golden, then orange, then a deep amber as the sun goes further and the light changes. It looks, in this light, more beautiful than it usually manages, more permanent, more like the thing it represents rather than just the thing itself. 60,000 people below you, all of them managing in their various ways the complicated project of being alive in this city, in this century, at this particular moment when the old ways of understanding the world and the new ways of understanding the world are living side by side in the same streets, sometimes in the same buildings, sometimes in the same conversation. The physicians of the medical school and the Howdie wives of the closes, the humoral theory and the knowledge in Mistress Crichton's jars, the theory coming later to explain what has already been learned by practice, all of it present, all of it in motion, all of it aimed in its various ways at the same thing, which is keeping people alive long enough to see another June evening from their window, another summer light going gold on the castle walls, another day of the city being itself, impossible and overwhelming and somehow, against all reasonable expectation, sufficient. Your mother puts her hand over yours on the windowsill. She doesn't say anything. She doesn't need to. Below you, Edinburgh breathes. It is later now. The window is closed. The light has gone. The candle on the table gives the room its last hour of yellow warmth, before you'll blow it out and save the rest for tomorrow. Your mother is already in her bed, asleep before you finished your tea. She sleeps well now, the deep unhurried sleep of someone whose body is not fighting anything, who is just tired in the ordinary way, the tire that comes from a day of honest work and will be resolved by morning. Tam is asleep on his side of the room, one arm thrown over his face the way he always sleeps, the arm that grew 3 inches in winter, now long enough to actually cover his eyes properly. You sit alone with the candle. Outside, Edinburgh has gone to its nighttime self. The taverns are working, the closes are dark. Somewhere down the hill the watchman is calling the hours in his steady voice, the sound of it carrying up through the cold air. You think about the year that has passed, the fear in the dark room at 3 in the morning, the cold stone floor under your bare feet, the herbs you mixed by firelight and did not know if they were enough, the journey up the high street to Mr. Affleck's shop with coins you could not afford to spend, Mistress Crichton at the door with her grey-green knowledge, Margaret Irvine's ear pressed against your mother's back, listening to the sound of fluid in the lung, Tam carrying the water bucket silently while you slept, Jean on the floor of her room across the landing not knowing what to do. All of it. You think about what you know now that you did not know a year ago. Not just the herbs, not just the specific knowledge of the possets and the plasters and the right position for sleeping with fluid in the chest. The other thing, the larger thing, that illness in Edinburgh in 1753 is navigable. Not always survivable, your father proved that, but navigable. That the network on the landing is real and functional. That the howdie wives and the women with their jars of herbs and the neighbours who appear with soup are a system, an actual system, unofficial and invisible and sustained by nothing more formal than the relationships between people who live close enough to each other to hear each other in the night, and that this system is worth knowing, worth being part of, worth contributing to, worth passing on. Mistress Crichton said it without saying it. Your mother said it more directly. It should go somewhere. You look at the shelf of jars in the corner, this shelf that has grown over the past months from the 3 or 4 items you started with to something more. Dried things in cloth and linen and clay pots, things Mistress Crichton has given you as the teaching has continued, things you have identified yourself and added, the thyme from the market, the elder you gathered yourself last autumn in the small area of waste ground near the tanneries where elder trees grow in defiant abundance. The shelf is yours now. It is different from Mistress Crichton's shelf, smaller and less organised, but it is yours. It contains your version of the knowledge, filtered through your particular experience and your particular understanding. You will add to it. You will keep learning. You will stand at Jean's door the next time the child cries in the night, with the same calm that Mistress Crichton brought to your door, and you will say, "Here is what I know. It is real. It will help." The candle sputters. You look at it. A few more minutes, then you should blow it out. Outside, the watchman calls another hour. Edinburgh is still there in the dark, its 60,000 lives breathing and turning and dreaming and waking and sick and well and frightened and calm and hungry and fed and all the other states that 60,000 lives exist in simultaneously. The constant churn of a city that is alive in the way that only cities are alive, made not of stone or smoke, but of the people who fill the stone and breathe in spite of the smoke. You will sleep soon. You will wake in the morning to the bells, the way you always do. The fire will need building, and the water will need fetching, and there will be work to do, and people to look in on, and the day will be what the day is. But right now, in this moment, you have everything you need to know. The candle goes down to its last inch. You watch it for a while. Your hands are in your lap, the seamstress's hands, the slightly calloused tips, these small scars from a needle that slipped, the roughness from cold water and coal dust and the dry Edinburgh winter. Hands that have done real work this year. Hands that have touched your mother's forehead at 3 a.m. and held a cloth during coughing and rubbed goose grease in slow circles and mixed herbs in hot water in the dark. Useful hands. Working hands. You are warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have a roof over your head and a family sleeping behind you and a shelf of jars that represent something real, something earned, something that did not exist before this year and will not stop existing now. That is more than nothing. That is, in Edinburgh in 1753, a great deal. The candle, you lean forward and blow it out. Lean forward, the room goes dark. The comfortable dark of a room you know completely. The dark that is only dark because the light has gone, not because something is wrong. The last ghost of the candle smell drifts through the room, and then it is just the room itself, the smell of the Edinburgh night and the familiar smell of home and the breathing of 2 people you love. Outside, the watchman calls. St. Giles's answers. You close your eyes. The city below goes on being itself, its noise muffled now, distant. The sound of something that is functioning, that is alive, that is moving through the night toward another morning where the bells will ring and the market will open and the herb women will take their places and the howdie wives will climb their stairs and the physicians will open their books and the women on the landings will hear each other in the night and come when they are needed, with their soup and their herbs and their 60 years of watching bodies and knowing what they know, all of it happening below you, all of it happening without your attention, without your participation, tending itself, the way a city tends itself, the way a living thing tends itself, in the dark. Let it happen. Let the watching go. Let the calculations rest. Let the shelf of jars and the ledger of coins and the planning that never quite stops wait until morning, where it will be waiting anyway, patient, unchanged, ready for you. Let your hands be still. Let your eyes stay closed. Let the sounds of Edinburgh come to you without demand, the bells and the watchmen and the distant noise of the taverns, the sounds that mean the city is alive, the sounds that have been the last sounds you hear at the end of every day since you came here 3 years ago, and that have become, whether you meant them to or not, the sound of home, the same as last night, the same as tomorrow night, the same as all the nights stretching ahead, the ones you can plan for and the ones you can't, the ones where everyone is well, and the ones where someone is sick and you're awake at 3 a.m, feeling a forehead in the dark and thinking about what you have and what you know and what you will do next. But not tonight. Tonight, just this. The dark and the bells and the breathing of the people you love and the shelf of jars that will be there in the morning. The city below you, breathing. You, breathing with it. Let it go. Let it go. Let everything you carried today go down into the dark, the way the day itself goes down, the way all days go down, releasing what they held, giving it back to the night, to the rest that makes tomorrow possible. You have done enough. You have been enough. You have known enough, and given enough, and held enough through the hours when holding was what was needed. It is enough. Let sleep come the way it came to your mother through the fever and the coughing, the real sleep, the healing sleep, the sleep that is the body's own best medicine, the thing that all the herbs and all the possets and all the knowledge on all the shelves in all the buildings are really just trying to create the conditions for. Real sleep, deep and dark and without demand. Let it come, it's here. The city takes one more breath below you. The long, slow, collective exhalation of 60,000 lives settling into the night, and you breathe with it, and then you're gone, and that's enough. Good night.